just want to jump on that for 45 minutes. But um, man, I don't know. It's hard to distill all my thoughts here, but generally, I love Dave Chappelle. I love what he does, and I do think that he is the greatest comedian walking the earth that I know about, at least. And part of the reason that I think that is because he makes he makes the decision to touch on difficult things. And I think that there's a value, whether he's right or wrong about whatever point he's making, and whatever angle he's choosing to take on a particular topic. I think the fact that he's touching on sore spots and the fact that he's prompting these conversations, I think, is an inherent good. It's good for us to talk about these things because the anger and the outrage and the disconnection and the miscommunication means to me that these are conversations, these are topics that we need to learn how to talk about better. We need to get better at talking about them. And that includes Dave. He also is part of the conversation, and he's also part of the learning how to communicate better. Um, I don't think he's transphobic. I think he's as transphobic as he is racist against white people or black people, or that he hates babies or anything else that he jokes about, right? I think that, at least in my mind, the comedy club and the comedy stage and the comedy special is a very specific context that is kind of an intellectual Wild West, right? So when it comes to Dave Chappelle, for example, I laugh at his jokes many, many times, even when I totally disagree with the underlying point that he's using his joke to, convey, right? So even if I disagree with him about, he makes a joke about policing and I laugh, but I don't necessarily agree exactly with his stance on that particular situation, right? I don't necessarily agree with him about this particular situation on racism. So, many of you brought up specific instances where it's like, he kind of fudged this, he kind of did that, right? And I can see all of those things and I can still laugh at the joke and I can still see the context for what it is, right? And I think that, you know, I do think he's trying to say something. I think he's an artist trying to express himself, right? But it is in a particular context, and I do think that that context matters. Um, but one thing that I guess I just wanted to bring up is it wasn't in Sticks and Stones, but it was the kind of the addendum to Sticks and Stones. Like if you dig into Netflix, you can find it. It's like an extra 20 minutes or something when he was on Broadway and he was talking about it. And he talks more about Daphne Dorman. He talks more about that relationship. And he said something that I never forgot, which is that Daphne told him, people get mad at you for making these jokes because they say that the jokes normalize transphobia, right? Or they something to this effect, right? They're normalizing hatred against trans people. But they never say that just the existence of the jokes, just the fact that you're pointing at us and saying something normalizes us as, people who exist, right? And I think there's something really important there because Dave does come after everybody the way that, Dr. Lunsford said, Lunsford, sorry. He does come after everybody. He bombs on everyone. And, it's to switch comedians briefly. It's kind of like, I see it as almost like a Don Rickles thing. When Don Rickles points to you and starts berating you, it was called getting rickled and it was an honor. It was a kind of, oh my God, I can't believe he picked me to, just completely destroy. And I think a lot of it is probably just my personal attitude. A lot of it is just the way that I am. I'm okay with hearing things that I'm like, I kind of winced at that, but then I kind of laugh at the fact that I winced. So,
Mhm.
there's some therapy going on there probably for me, but um, but yeah, I think that maybe that's overlooked, right? I think that maybe what's important here is the fact that Dave didn't have any compunction about taking trans people and putting them into this bin of everyone that he bombs on, right? And then of course when that gets a certain reaction, he's a comedian. He's going to cross the line. The whole point of comedy is to be outrageous and to be absurd and to exaggerate and to just go crazy. That's part of what makes comedy comedy, right? And you know, Aaron was talking about many of the, you know, his subjective judgments. Like, I don't think that joke worked. I have plenty of those of my own, right? I don't think he nailed this one. I think he could have done more with that. The space shoes thing, I laughed. I thought it was really funny, and I would have loved to have gotten 5 more minutes of that, right? So I think that it's just, you know, we're kind of mixing all these different conversations into one giant ball and then freaking out at the ball. Where I think maybe we need to take a step back and kind of tease things out.
Brittany?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, I was just going to speak on something that Angel said. I think that a lot of times when it comes to this type of thing, especially when it comes to Dave, is like there's this idea of like, oh, you know, he jokes on everybody. You know, everybody catches the joke. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, in the sense that there needs to be a way for us to joke on everybody. You know, there needs to be a way for us to joke on white people, on black people, on trans people, on everybody. Has to be able to catch the joke, right? There can't be this one community that we're just not allowed to say anything about. And I think there is a way to joke about that, though. I think there are ways to tell jokes that aren't that don't lead to greater harm, right? I think that he told some jokes in there that were still funny and weren't offensive or anything like that, weren't transphobic. I think that his joke about Mike Pence, for example, being like a closeted gay man, like, I thought that was hilarious, you know? Or even when he talks about the feminist movement needing like a strong male leader, and him being willing to take on that, you know, that responsibility. It's funny, but like the question that you ask yourself then is like, why is that funny, right? The reason why those things are funny is because we all have a recognition that those things are ridiculous, right? We know that it's crazy to think that the feminist movement would hail Dave Chappelle as like, or any man as the leader of the movement. It would be antithetical to the movement itself, right? And even the Mike Pence joke, like no one has brought up the fact that Mike Pence is gay or thought of Mike Pence being gay. It's ridiculous. And it's just something that we laugh about because we understand that it's a joke. And so when these things come up, when homophobic comments are made or transphobic jokes or anything like that are made, and we say something about it, when people come back with the retort of like, oh, it's just a joke and he's joking on everybody. My question is, okay, what's the joke? Right? Like, what is it what is the end goal of this joke? What are you actually saying in the joke? Because we know Dave, right? Dave is not just telling jokes without any end game in mind or without having any point that he's trying to make. And I know that a lot of times, again, like other people were saying, like Abby was saying earlier too, he's a comedian. And so obviously, like, we have this special thing with comedians where it's like, okay, they're trying to be funny. Why are we taking it so seriously? This is not a debate or anything like that. It's not a debate show, whatever. But with people like Dave, I think we do hold him to a high regard because we know how intelligent and brilliant that man is and how he is trying to communicate something in the social political space with everything that he's saying. So,
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's important to note, but I think, you know, kind of like what Kyle was talking about, the joke that Kyle was talking about where he was like, I'm gonna tell you what the punchline is, and I'm gonna repeat it in 10 minutes, and you're still gonna laugh. That's how good I am, right? That punchline was, I kicked her right in the pussy. It's the stupidest, most juvenile thing in the world, right? So yes, Dave is very smart, and Dave is often playing with many layers in his comedy, but he's also not at all above a dick joke or a pussy joke or, you know, anything completely just ridiculous, because I think it's important to remember that his first job is to say things he thinks are funny. And the skill comes in at, you know, let me figure out what the vast majority of people are going to agree with me about what's funny so that they laugh, so that I succeed at what I'm supposed to be doing. And the other thing is just, you know, the jokes that you pointed out, right? Like the feminist jokes and the Mike Pence jokes, right? There are plenty of people who love those jokes, and I have no problem with that because they don't give a fuck about Mike Pence, right? Or they don't give a fuck about those kinds of feminists, at least, right? And I think part of the issue here is that everybody loves it when comedians cross the line, except when it's their line. And I guess my personal thing is just, I recognize that. And so I try really hard not to have any lines. I want him to make me uncomfortable. I want him to say things that I go, ugh, because then I know I'm touching on something important. Something's happening here in my brain. And that's one of the reasons I value comedy so much. So there's that as well.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I want to push back on Angel a little bit here, because I think he is correctly characterizing one criticism of people who've challenged Chappelle that I think is flawed, which is this implication that like it's ideological capture that is causing you to not find this funny, or it's, you know, because he's attacking your sacred cows that you are suddenly being critical of his comedy. And I think that's not a very fair critique, especially because a lot of people, especially in this room, have like leveled very specific criticisms about what we think went wrong here and talked about like the idea of punching down and these sort of things. And like this idea of the importance of starting a conversation that Angel's putting forward, I agree with. Angel knows that I'll have a conversation more than anybody, but there's better and worse ways to start a conversation. And Angel, I spends a lot of time trying to get people to start conversations in better ways. So I think it's a reasonable critique to say, yes, he started a conversation, but did he do it well? Like if I was a comedian, right, and I got up and I did 50 minutes where I dropped the N-word over and over again, and I didn't earn it in any kind of way, but like the last 15 minutes were me saying, here's this black comedian who thinks I'm very funny. They're dead now, but they think I'm very funny, so back off of my comedy. I think everyone would reasonably recognize that that was really bad for a lot of reasons, and I would be criticized, and we wouldn't say, oh, well, he started a conversation about race, right? Like that's not, I think, a reasonable response when like Chappelle, an expert at what he's doing, fails to, I think, correctly target the jokes in the right kind of ways. Because yes, you can make fun of everybody, but there are right and wrong ways about making fun of people. He does it sometimes. Like he sometimes makes LGBTQ jokes that he targets them in the right way, like the car one that I mentioned earlier, where he makes a joke about almost everybody in the car, and they're all, I think, in various ways accurate to the community and funny. But there are other ways where he just doesn't do that, and instead, you know, makes some pretty crass jokes that don't go anywhere, and then is sort of defensive when he's called out for it, which I think is not starting a conversation at all.
That's, yeah, and that is totally valid to say. I think the only thing I would point to there is that where you draw the line at where he becomes crass or where he's joking in the wrong way is going to be different than where I draw it. Or
yeah, but let me be clear.
Kyle
I draw it farther
Jeremy.
than almost every human being. I will point people to Doug Stanhope's set about Jews. Everybody Google Doug Stanhope Jews if you want 10 minutes of the most line-crossing comedy you will find. But it's brilliant. It's way better than the Space Jews line in this one because he like earns it and then he works it, right? He works the awkwardness in the right kind of ways. And I think it's fair to say, you know, Chappelle whiffed on this one, and hopefully he'll do better next time, and hopefully he will grow some between now and, you know, the break he's taking and whatever he does next.
I think that's totally fair. And I think, but I guess, again, I think it's kind of what I was talking about before, where now we're kind of fusing two different conversations together. We can have a technical conversation about whether that joke landed, whether his, you know, on a craft level, he's doing what he should be doing. And then there's another conversation about what his intention is, who he is as a human being, what he cares about, who he hates, who he doesn't hate. And I feel like a lot of that stuff gets thrown into all the criticisms that you're bringing up right now.
I don't think anyone in this room is trying to make an argument about we know what's in Dave Chappelle's heart of hearts. I think
I'm speaking generally.
Argument. Yeah, I know, but like, I don't think it's valuable to criticize like the people on the Twitter who think that Dave Chappelle is a transphobe. Like, that's their impression to have, but like we're having, I think, a conversation about whether the content itself was transphobic, and that's a separate question from the you know, artist's intent to some extent. And I think we can say he wasn't intending to be transphobic, but he succeeded in doing so because he failed at XYZ.
I guess it depends on how you define transphobia. I have a hard time defining that without the intention of the person, right? Like, you know, and we've talked about this before. You and I have done podcasts before, so we've talked about this, where disconnecting the intention of the messenger from not even the message, but like the receptacle within which the message is supposed to be, it starts to get hairy and it becomes super subjective there. So I don't know, but I don't think, I mean, I don't think that if Dave doesn't hate anybody, I don't think that he can communicate his hatred of anybody. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Could I ask you a question, Angel? And I know other people probably have things they want to say about that too, but do you think that it's possible to be racist without intending to be, and to be racist without actively hating someone, you know, like
difficult.
actively hating like a Black person.
Yeah, like I think, you know, so I think that someone can receive something you said as racist, even if you didn't mean it that way, right? And it can have that effect for them in that moment, right? They can feel the feelings, you know, they can mishear you and they can feel the feelings. And it's not really about that for me, because that's understandable. Like that stuff happens, right? So yes, and it, you know, then we're talking about systems and stuff like that that have outcomes that we label racist because of, you know, disparities based on those groupings and that sort of stuff. So I'm acknowledging that, but you know, just to keep it right here for a second, I think the important part in this case is about what we do next. What do we do with that, right? So we can say, I didn't like that. That made me feel this way. And what I see, you know, unfortunately, like I keep referring to the larger conversation because that's what I'm largely responding to. But what I see is the reaction happens, right, within the person, and then the person responds as though the reaction was intended. And that's where the problem starts, right? So knowing that Dave Chappelle means me no harm, even when he makes a joke that makes me bristle or makes me feel really terrible or makes me feel really insecure or touches on something that I'm sensitive about, knowing that he didn't mean to harm me, right? I know what the context is. I know what his intentions are. That changes the way that I react because I'm cognizant of those two, you know, the dynamic is working in two directions. And I think we need to get better at doing that because communication is difficult. And, you know, again, we can talk more technically about whether Dave nailed something or not. And I can agree completely with Aaron about, you know, like the space Jews thing. I totally agree with him about that stuff. And there are many things in the special and all of his specials that I agree are, you know, he kind of flubbed that, or I don't agree with that. That wasn't very good. But overall, I appreciate what he's doing, and I appreciate his willingness to do it, and I appreciate the honesty with which he does it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. No. I can ramble. So
I think Lucy has something. I just wanted to like kind of put the disclaimer that Black people in no way can be racist, just because of the way that racism works. Maybe they can be prejudiced. But the way that racism implies systemic power, the ability to change people's outcomes. So like, you know, there's no reverse racism there. So, you know, like, so I just wanted to be clear about that. And I do appreciate him asking the question, Dave Chappelle in the special, can gay people be racist? And I think that that is something that is missed a lot. And so I just had like 4 quick points I wanted to touch on really briefly that were brought up. One of the things, 2 of the jokes that I think that were going on that people like to gloss over and not extract. Like I get that some jokes may have landed, some have not have landed, but I kind of hear the argument of his jokes don't land after people have brustled down this argument that he's transphobic. Then it's like, well, it wasn't funny to me. Well, who said he's perfect, that he had to be perfect, or that the jokes were all for you? And so one of the things that I would say about that is, so he says clearly with the joke about getting into the fight and a white gay person was going to call the cops on him. He says that gay people are a minority until they need to be white again, which is so powerful and such a clear critique of the LGBTQ community that's made by people from within the LGBT community. But people don't want to speak on that. It's like, no, he's transphobic. Then he brings up the issue of like of a fan who doesn't like his work, and he's like, "Oh, well, she's an old white woman. She's a white woman. Of course, she looks like hell because she's old." This is something that an old comedian, Red Fox, there's nothing on earth uglier than an old white woman. Why are these jokes so hurtful? Oh, because white women get up in arms, because you're standing up. What is for, you know, as long as this country's been a country, has been the prevailing standard of beauty, which is a white woman, and you're denouncing that, and you're just cutting it through with a punchline, and that is upending white supremacy in a 7-line joke, right? So that's going to cause these guttural reactions to people because anti-Blackness and white supremacy is so entrenched within us. So these jokes are like, but not spoken on because it's a different banner that gets flown. And the last 2 points, one, we have to remind ourselves that this country loves a nigga hunt. And I'm just going to be upfront about it. And but by a nigga hunt, I mean an all outdoors manhunt. We've been designed to do this. from slavery days, escaped slave, fugitive, cops, OJ. Loves a good nigga hunt. So the minute a black man has done something bad, it's like, what do you do? Where? You've got 4 centuries of rage ready to be unleashed. And what did he say? Yeah, wow! The noises white people make when they're ready for a lynching, all that fury is ready to be unleashed because we have a country that loves a good nigga hunt. You know, only people that like a nigga hunt more than niggas is white folks. So this country's primed and always ready for a nigga hunt. So I'm always cautious when a black man is being held up as like the poster child for any one mass crime, whether it be rape, whether it be transphobia, whether it be anything. Because I know this country love a good nigga hunt. So I think this is a moment where Dave Chappelle said that as well with all the Cliffords that have been denounced. And the last point, you brought up something very interesting, Angel, when you talked about the style of humor. So black people for a long time have had to do comedy because when we was getting whooped and beat in slave rooms and in like, you know, raped in like French Bordeaux, like we, like in New Orleans, we used jokes. We had humor. It was like, dang, he whooped you about 90 times. like, you know, we had to find ways to get out of that, right? And so humor is something that is pivotally tied. There's research on it. There's a whole body of literature, the way that humor is tied to Black joy and Black pain and Black struggle. And we have something in our culture called the dozens, where we play the dozens, where we laugh at our mom's big feet or our uncle's bunion or our cousin's gray hairs. Like these are things that for a well-meaning, high-to-do, polite white society come off as crass. Oh my God, you did not just say that. I thought it, but you said it. And so when you take Black culture and you put it up in front of the masses and we laugh the way we laugh, and it's very interesting when we investigate things under the white gaze versus without the white gaze. So if you're under a white lens, I'm sorry, a lot of things will not be funny to you because they are not written for you. They're not for you. And that's okay. But the fact that you think everything has to be for you or is meant for your consumption is problematic. So those are my last points on that. Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing.
No, okay. After that,
no, I'm just
first off, I'm going to see. Lewis, do you hear me? Can you hear me? This is a viewer.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we're going to get to you. Someone said they had something, Kyle?
Yeah, I just want to say one last
Angel.
thing.
Okay, sorry.
Kind of touching on what you were saying, Dr. Lunsford. So I have a group chat with my siblings. If anyone saw this group chat, they would be horrified and they would think that we loathe each other. But there's so much love there in all the bombing and the dozens like you're talking about. Like I remember growing up in Living Color, the Dirty Dozens, that game show. That was my favorite thing in the world. It was the best. I love roasts. I love that stuff. And that's how we kind of bomb on each other and we communicate in that way. And it's not for everybody. Some people, you know, like my wife is kind of like, I can't even be in that group chat. It's insane, you know, and she's like, I'm not going to do this. Like, I can't. But we love each other more than anything. And we have a closer relationship than a lot of people that I know who have siblings. You know, they're like, oh, I don't talk to my brother. I don't talk to my sister. And I couldn't imagine that. Right. So there's that. There's insult. And then there's this kind of thing of bombing with love. And maybe it's twisted and maybe there's, you know, some psychological stuff going on there. Right. But I think the love is present and the love is palpable if you really want to see it. And I think that's another thing that's going on with Dave. You know, like Aaron mentioned, you know, the admirable thing that Dave did about walking away from his show because it was being co-opted by the wrong people, right? And I think, you know, it's interesting that he did basically that in this last special. You know, he said, it's over. I'm done. I'm not making another joke about this until we are both sure that we are laughing together. And that's exactly why he walked away from the show, because he wasn't laughing the way that guy was laughing. And he didn't like that.